got my grand.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are thrilled to be able to have Her Excellency Ambassador Ketsumetsu Matthews with us on today's podcast series. As those of you who have been following this particular space know, this is an opportunity to learn, engage the wisdom of faith inspired leaders from around the world who have served in many different domains, not only in faith based or religious spaces, but in fact in almost all domains of the common good and public service in general. Um, Lead Integrity is a woman founded, women of faith founded, and the first such global management consultancy. We are Women of Faith founded. We are not focused only on women and women's issues. In fact, we're looking at the entire gamut of public service, specifically through the lens of sustainable human development, international human rights, humanitarianism, peace and security, and media and communication spaces. As such, we deliberately set out to showcase the voices of experienced professionals for whom faith has played and continues to play a very important role in informing or being the background of their particular endeavors in life. We are delighted to have with us here today Her Excellency Ambassador Ketsumetsu Matthews, who has served in many places and spaces, including as ambassador of her country, South Africa, to a number of countries in Central Asia. She will tell us a little bit more about her experience. We hope to listen to her. Today is the 21st of March, which is a very significant day in the history of South Africa, a country which many of us have learned and continue to learn from its people and their struggles, and which most recently has had an amazing endeavor at the international human rights, humanitarian law sphere of seeking to provide moral and legal support to an embattled uh, people, the Palestinians. A very historic achievement for a country like South Africa, for which the price, I understand, is very heavy and continues to be exacted in many challenging ways. We hope that in our conversation with Ambassador Matthews, we can learn the background to her struggle, her achievements, and remarkable accomplishments, and learn from her wisdom. Ambassador Matthews, it is a pleasure to have you with us here today. We intend to listen to you. This is about as much as I'm going to speak. We look forward to being able to perhaps ask you a question or two once you are willing. In the meantime, the floor is yours. Please tell us your story.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Azakaram, my dear sister, for inviting me to have this interview, which was very unexpected. And sometimes I don't feel that I've done enough to merit being interviewed at all. You know, you've done such a lot, you've achieved so much. And when I look at you and I look at what you've achieved, I feel that I'm not yet there. So, but nevertheless, you know, the little that I've done, um, I've tried my best to. I was brought up as the eldest of seven, so that in itself gave you a huge sense of responsibility, because I was always being told that, you know, I will be followed by the other children, so I have to be responsible and ensure that whatever I do, I always try to do the right thing. I was also told that don't be scared of making mistakes. You will make mistakes because that is part of life, but you should not make mistakes which can be avoided by just being a little bit smart, thinking before you do things. And then the mistakes that you do make will not be mistakes which could have been avoided. They will be mistakes of life. So, you know, that was a very powerful lesson. and it avoided a lot of things, which, especially girls can get trapped into. And so I think it was very, very good advice. But I think the reason why my parents emphasized some of these sort of philosophical, tenets was because they knew that we would spend most of our time alone because my father was so political and so involved in the struggle for the liberation of South Africa from a very, very young age. By the time he was 18, he was already in the African National Congress at university, and he was already, being part of the African National Congress Youth League. And so I think because he could vision the type of life that they were going to have, they really emphasized, the philosophy of life and how to conduct yourself in the world, because you're going to be, a lot of the time you're going to be alone, and you're going to have to make decisions, and they have to be decisions that are correct as far as is possible. So I think that really, it helped a lot to shape the type of people we became, especially the girls. There were three girls and four brothers, and we learned to be very independent. We were told that it's very important for girls to have professions, and to rely on ourselves and not on men, because we were told you don't know what type of man you'll marry. And my dad used to sometimes joke and say, love is a mystery. If we could understand what love is, then we would be God, and we are not God. And so we have to accept that love is a mystery, and that you may marry somebody who may be a drunk, and you will be the one that will have to ensure that there's food on the table and that the family stays cohesive. So he was adamant, that we should have professions as his girls. And I think that I'm really grateful to them for shaping us in that way. And indeed, ultimately, we did really raise ourselves in many ways. We were exiled to London. My father was banned from South Africa and could never return until after the release of Mr. Mandela. That was the first time he came back, and him and my mother came back. And so most of our life was spent outside South Africa in, Lesotho, and then Zambia, and then ultimately, in England, where we grew up. And I think that was probably the most stable um, background that we had when we arrived in England, because we accepted as children that that is where we will have to live and maybe die, because nobody knew whether we would ever get our freedom. Um, they they always used to say that maybe not in our lifetime.
Mm.
And after freedom, my dad told me that him and my mom still woke up sometimes after 94 in South Africa, when he was now in government with one of his best friends, Nelson Mandela. And they used to pinch themselves and say, are we really free? Did we really achieve this? Because they just didn't believe that it had been accomplished. So I think that's my background, that's my grounding, in politics, in how to manage yourself, in the world as a girl and as a woman, and the importance of education and integrity. I think those are the lessons that have carried us through, and we've tried to do things in such a way that we don't besmirch the name of the family, because we always tell each other that we didn't make the name famous, so we don't have the right to besmirch the name. We have a duty to protect the name, and the only way we can protect the name is by behaving in such a way and conducting ourselves in such a way, both in public service and in private, in a way that will always elevate the name. So that's how I try to lead my life.
Amazing and brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. you've lived, as you've clarified, you've had the experience which very, very few immigrants ever do. You've lived as an immigrant yourself with your family in different contexts, and you've served as an ambassador to your country in different contexts. Can you tell us, you told us about what it was like for your mother and father to sort of pinch themselves when he, your father, was serving in the government alongside Nelson Mandela. What was it like for you to transition from, in that experience of your life, from being an immigrant to being an ambassador, a formal representative of your country? What are some of your own things in your own mind about that the myriad experiences from one end of the political spectrum, if you will, to the other?
Well, it was a bit, it was a bit odd because I always believed that I would spend all my life in England
Mm,
and I would probably die there because the struggle seems to be getting harder and harder and harder. And the level of aggression and the power of the apartheid government seemed to be getting stronger and stronger as the years went by. So I just thought, I will live my life, uh, have my children, everything of my life will happen in England. And I became a barrister, and I worked in England in local government in local government advising different local authorities. So it was a bit of a shock when President Mandela was released from prison, and I had to completely rethink my life, and even the thought of leaving England and going somewhere else was such a huge upheaval because I had children, and my life was so embedded in England. Although I had Africa was the power, the foundation of what we believed in. And my father used to say, it's about Africa, 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 Africa. It doesn't matter where you are an African. Remember that. And never, ever forget our culture, our respect for our parents, the role of the elders, in our culture. And so he used to always remind us of that. So it was something that was sort of in the background, but it was never going to happen. And so when President Mandela was released from prison, it was a huge, huge shock, but it was a tremendous excitement. And all of us had to rethink where we are going to be. Are we going to go back home? How are we going to do it? Are we good enough, educated enough to be able to give service?
mm,
We're not medical doctors because they're always on the forefront of requirements. We're not scientists. And those were the thoughts that went through my mind. What can I offer? What can I do? You know, I'm a lawyer. South Africa doesn't need lawyers. What can I contribute, to the country? So those are some of the questions. But I think I just had that passion that I need to go back.
mm,
Because I said, okay, I'm in England as an English Black person. What can I offer England? Not really. I cannot really offer anything. Yes, there are Black people. They do need us. There's a lot of racism, and there was a lot of suffering as well amongst the Black people. There were a lot of insecurities in our people in England. But I felt that there were enough of us there that could carry on the work there. But going home was a completely different ball game. You
mm,
know, we were basically starting from scratch. We had to scrap the apartheid system. What would we be left with? How do we then now create a new people, a new country, a new mental, thinking, removing all this onion of colonialism, and trying to peel it off. And so that was the kind of those are the sort of conversations that we were having, and that was the kind of thinking, that took place. And my parents, they said, look, you know that although President Mandela has been released from prison, it's still the apartheid government in charge.
mm,
I am still a banned person. I still am a stateless citizen according to them. So if I go back, I can still get arrested. I have to follow the procedure and find out how do I return back to my own country from which I was banished without inadvertently finding myself at the airport and being told you are not in compliance with the law. So they were very measured. And, it is such a lesson because indeed, a lot of the comrades who went back immediately found themselves in the situation where they didn't have the correct papers. They were in insecure positions. And so he waited until he was sure that when he arrives, his dignity would not be tarnished. He would arrive with my mother, they would be legally in the country, and then the process would start of reclaiming their citizenship. And so that made me kind of step back and say, okay, you go. We'll see how things go for all of you, and we will hang back, carry on with our lives in England, and then we will start to, tread the path towards coming back. I never imagined that when I go back, I would ever become an ambassador, of our country. It was not even a thought in my mind, at all. Um, I went back really thinking, well, I've got a legal background, and they are building a new constitution, and so maybe I can contribute towards creating this new South Africa, which is going to have a democratic constitution where everybody is equal, and I will be part of trying to implement that equality and all the tenets of the constitution, and trying to reshape the country and change the country from a totalitarian state to a democratic state. And so when I came back, that's what I started to do. To work. I worked as advisor to one of our ministers, Minister Ivy Matsepeka, and her job was to dismantle the broadcasting and the telecommunications system, which was basically total propaganda, state-based, apartheid communication system. And that was our task, to try and unbundle that and break it up and create, a diverse media that speaks to everybody. That was my beginning back in South Africa.
Wow. Ambassador, if you'll allow me, if you have a chance to put your phone on something hard surface that perhaps wouldn't move around so much as you,
I'm trying to make it stand, but
if it's possible, it would, I think, make a
maybe
difference.
if I hold it like this, is it better?
No, that's fine. I think when you speak, like the rest of us, it'll move a wee.
Yeah,
I'll move a lot
yeah,
when we speak, but
yeah.
if it's possible, it's okay. If not, what I just wanted to alert you that there's a bit of movement that is involuntary anyway. So forgive me for that interlude. But when you realized there's a dismantling, a deconstruction that needed to happen, what were your thoughts in that space of dismantling and reconstructing? What advice would you give so many who are now undergoing a tremendous amount of either polarization politically, socially, economically, and or actual war in their respective countries, with a realization that certain things need to be dismantled and reconstructed? What would be your advice to some of the women who are going through or may well have to go through some of those same stages of deconstruction, reconstruction, rebuilding a space of that is nevertheless socially cohesive, that is peaceful, that has aspects of forgiveness of those who's leveraged a great deal of suffering? What are some of your nuggets that you want to share with so many other men and women going through deep turmoil and transition in their respective nations?
I've lost you. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I heard the question.
Perfect.
You just disappeared for a little bit. Well, I think that um, the one of the best foundations for reconstruction and development is the example of President Nelson Mandela. I think that he has set the best foundation for all of us when we start from scratch. And, you know, his core belief was reconciliation and forgiveness, because he believed that if you don't forgive and you don't reconcile, it's going to be impossible for you to move forward, because you're going to carry that cancer, that angst in your heart, and it prevents you from really wholeheartedly developing, first of all, yourself as a person, and secondly, the people around you and the structures around you. So I think that for me was the best foundation. And it wasn't just himself, it was all of the comrades, all of the elders, that generation. They really passionately and deeply believed in reconciliation and forgiveness. It was their benchmark for moving forward. And, I remember once something happened in the office, and I was really quite angry, quite irritated. And I addressed it with the minister at the time. And minister said to me, "Oh, shame, I think just forgive him. He means well." And it's typically South African. That is something that you will hear often as part of the discourse in the country, is that, it's something that I really respect. I've learned so much from our people, from South African people, because in a way I'm an outsider, although I'm a South African. I spent so many years away from home. So it's even been an education for me to really see the reality of reconciliation and forgiveness, and the depth of good in the people. So I think that you first of all must have that foundation. It doesn't mean you must forget, because if you forget, then you're going to repeat things that you shouldn't. I think that you have to always believe that there's a better tomorrow and that you can be part of creating it. And you have to have that foundation. And I'm always surprised when our leaders, especially our African leaders, they do things. And I keep saying, but why don't they copy President Mandela? Because they say they respect him, and they say, they love him and they revere him, but they don't do some of the things that he actually advised us to do. And I think that he's such an icon, and you can't go wrong too wrong. Then I think that's the first thing. It's that foundation that he set, and then that foundation helps us to develop as human beings, as people, as individuals. And he actually writes about it in his book. In one of his books, he writes about self-development being a daily process that doesn't stop, like learning. And then I think the next thing is having, properly crafted documents that you can continuously refer back to keep you on track. And again, I often hear South Africans, when they're complaining about wrongdoing, they often say, which parts of the Constitution are they following? Because they've been taught to learn the Constitution and to know the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. And I think you have to have documents that you can refer back to, that help you, to chart your course forward. You need to also have proper accountable structures, where if things go wrong, there are structures that you can go to that can guide you to put you back on track. Your legal structures need to be good. Your social structures, your civil society, you need to have structures within civil society that can act as guides to ensure that, you know, the correct thing is being done. But I also think the most important thing is dialogue, continuous dialogue between people. You know, the power of communication, good communication. It's I think it's really important so that, you know, people understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and for whose benefit. Um, and I think that was also something that you know, the elders believed in, that you've got to keep talking. You have to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who are you doing it for.
Plenty wisdom. Thank you, Your Excellency. You said something in all of what you shared. There was something that particularly struck me because you mentioned, why is it that people don't look to the example set by Mandela if they have so much respect for the man and his legacy and those who worked with him, quite frankly, like your own father? And the question is indeed very pertinent. Why are we not doing that? Why are world leaders not necessarily continuing to learn from the examples already set? We hear a lot of complaints about, look at the state of our leaders today. It's pretty sad. That may be true, but the question always will be, why are we not learning from the stalwarts? And certainly from Nelson Mandela himself. And it's interesting because you then said something along the lines of, why do we forget? I know, how come we forget? Forgive, absolutely. But why do we forget? And it's interesting why, because usually forgive and forget seem to go together. And in fact, what you're saying is, no, you can forgive. And that's what the history and the ongoing struggle within many parts of the world, especially in South Africa, you forgive. You had to figure out mechanisms. You put together mechanisms to enable the forgiveness, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But that does not mean to forget. There's an interesting cultural dissonance here, because in some people it's forgive and forget. And yet what you're sharing is something that I certainly, as somebody from North Africa, the Middle East, can also relate to, which is you can forgive, but you cannot and you should not forget. Which I think is a very important and critical nuance, because when you don't forget, you also can remember the leadership and the wisdom that took place. As you forgive, you do not forget. It's a very wise pendulum there that is worthy of us to think about much more deeply. What can we continue to learn? This brings me to the aspect of the faith, being inspired by faith, being motivated in some way, shape, or form by faith, any role that you feel. And there's two parts to the question. The first question is, how has faith played a role in your own journey, this remarkable journey of your life and that of your family? Has faith played a role? What is that role? And then I have another part, but let's talk to that for a second.
Well, you know, I think I don't know how I'd manage if I didn't have faith, if I didn't believe in God. I fervently, you know, really believe in the power of prayer. I really think prayer can move mountains. And I think that you know, it's something that you can hang on to. And especially when you're alone. You can never be lonely if you have faith. It carries you through so many things. And it also gives you a conscience, which is really important. You need to be able to, you know, my mom told me when I was really, I think I was about 16 or so, and my mom said, you know, the most important thing that you should have in life is a conscience. Every day, every night, you must ask yourself, what did I do today? Could I have done it better? Did I do anything wrong? And how do I correct it? Because she said that if you have a conscience, you will do fewer wrong things. And it will carry you through. Because when you have a conscience, you have integrity. You have moral fiber, and you get that integrity from deeply held faith. Because you always, you know, she said, don't compete with other people, compete with yourself. And when you must look at yourself, not at other people, because in your conversation with the Almighty, He's not going to ask you about the other people. He's going to ask you about you, and you're going to have to answer for yourself. So that that has kind of kept me going, you know, and it's difficult because sometimes when things are really going wrong, and the more you try to fix it, the more it goes wrong. Like a wheel that just keeps going zing, and you can't. It's just turning, and you're trying to catch hold of it, and you can't. Um, and the only thing I think that will stop the wheel turning is when you just sit down and pray, and you ask for guidance. Say, I can't do this anymore. But whilst that wheel is turning and going wrong, you can get very despondent, and you can actually lose your faith and say, well, why am I believing for, everything's going wrong. I'm praying every day. I'm doing, things I'm supposed to do, but stuff is still going wrong. But the stuff that's going wrong, it's you. It's what you're doing. Um, and so you need to say, how do I fix this so that I'm on the proper path again? How do I go back and then look to what have I been doing that has brought me to this point? And I think that is something that way of thinking has to do with having faith, really deeply held belief, and reliance on something greater than yourself. And I think it also gets rid of ego, because I think as people sometimes, ego runs away with us. And I think that having faith and believing in something greater than ourselves always reminds us that we're little people, and we're not in charge of the world. We don't control things. We're just, a little seed that's been put here for a while, and then we go away. So I really believe in God. I believe in Allah. I think that um, it's something that is part of my life, and I don't think I could manage without that belief.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Your own family, I think, showcases the diversity of beliefs that are
Yes,
certainly very
yes,
committed to faith itself.
yes,
Maybe could you just share a little tiny wee bit about the family dynamics in terms of relations to faith and different faiths within your own?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, my grandfather, Professor Z.K. Matthews, first of all, my great grandfather was a priest, was, Reverend John Knox Bokwe. And then he was, of the Church of Scotland. And then my grandfather, Z.K. Matthews, was Anglican, and very, very devout people. Um, but they believed that um, you have to respect all faiths because it all comes from one person, one being. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh, you have to respect those faiths. And you have to have, and my grandfather said, if you have a deep sense of self, the faith of somebody else shouldn't bother you. You should embrace that person as you embrace yourself. And that will make you a better person. And you can learn from that faith as much as they can learn from your faith. And they were very comfortable with having different faiths within the family because it was part of the universe, and the universal tenets of life don't change no matter what faith you are. Uh, if you steal, it doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim, you've stolen. And so I think that was how we were taught, that we must respect people and we must respect all faiths. And that being a decent human being is very important. And part of being a decent human being and part of being secure is believing in your faith, but also allowing someone else to tell you about their faith and to tell you why they believe in the way they believe. And it was part of what my grandfather used to say, is part of being civilized, because there are many civilizations and you have to accept all of them because they're part of the world, they're part of, the way the world is formulated. So I'm Muslim, my sister's Muslim, my nephews and my nieces, and other members of the family. Then my sister-in-law is Hindu, so we're a real multi-faith family. But we also have Jewish heritage as well as part of on my paternal grandmother's side. So it would be a bit weird if we didn't embrace those faiths. It's part of our history. It's part of our family history.
Yes, remarkable. I guess my last question to you before I would like to invite my dear colleagues who have joined us. My last question to you is this: you've seen how the legal landscapes across many continents have been operated in and are shifting. Some of us on this call are based in the United States, where we're living some fascinating shifts in law and the adherence and practice thereof. You've also witnessed the dramatic changes in political landscapes in different parts of the world. And you speak about the importance of, and you live the coexistence of different religious adherents. How do you see the roles that religions are playing today, whether there's anything in the legal space or in the political space? How do you see the tensions or the relationships between religions and politics today? Is it something that strikes you, makes you wonder, you have any thoughts of, and especially given this very critical day that you have today in South Africa that you're commemorating, where do you see that relationship between religion and politics today?
Well, as an African yourself, you know that Africans are very religious. We're very faithful people as a people across the continent. And I think it's actually quite difficult for some of our leaders to divorce religion from politics. They seem to be very intertwined on the continent. But here in South Africa, because of the constitution, we are a multi-faith country. And we also have, I don't know if it still operates, but I know that we have like an interfaith committee that regularly sits with the president. And sometimes they grumble, when they have grumbles about society in general, they grumble to the president, they grumble, in the commission, and they make certain statements which, government takes note of. And so I think that has helped our country a lot. We also have things like, for example, here in South Africa, when there's a huge tragedy or when something happens or if we have no rain, all faiths will have, prayers. They will have formal prayers as a society in connection with whatever it is that is bothering the country. And that is something that is very unusual. I haven't seen that in many other countries. But here in South Africa, it's quite normal. It's quite normal to see in a street whole lengths of tables put together so that everybody can have a meal and pray about whatever problem is the country is facing, and you know, it's and they pray together, all the faiths. So I think that's something that is really unique to South Africa. The other thing that is quite unique here is the inauguration of the head of state. The head of state in South Africa is inaugurated surrounded by all the leaders of all the faiths, including the African spiritual faiths. So when he takes his oath of office, he's surrounded by all of them, the rabbi, the imam, the heads of the Hindus. They all are on the stage with him when he takes his oath of, his oath of office. That is very unique. I haven't seen that really anywhere else. So I think that although, our law does not allow our judges to use religion when they make their decisions, they must use the constitution, but they do take cognizance of the faith of different people. And we have had some very groundbreaking constitutional cases relating to Islam, and to how property should be looked at in relation to women when a man dies in South Africa and he has more than one wife. The constitution is very clear about that, but there has been very important rulings in that regard, which government and everybody has had to take note of.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I would like, if you'll permit me, please, Your Excellency, to invite the colleagues on the call to share any comment or questions that they may have. And I'd like to begin by Dr. Sana Tayin, who's with us now, and who is a professor in Sana. I do not remember the name of the university, but you can say it yourself when you introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Ambassador. You have to forgive me, it's early in California. It looks like everyone's frozen. Okay.
No,
the
keep
screen
going.
looks a little better.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Sana Tayan. I am a professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Redlands. I'm also the daughter of Syrian immigrants who came to the United States in the 1970s. And listening to you speak about South Africa and the change of government, and when you were an immigrant in England, kind of resonated. It's not the same, but there's a feeling that I had in terms of when Syria, the dictatorship collapsed, and we have a whole new government, a whole new system has to be put in place. And my question is, I would love to know or to just learn a little bit about what your thoughts are about Syria. And, it's not the same issue of South Africa, but there are some similarities. And right now, the Syrian people were so excited. We also had to pinch ourselves to actually believe that the Assad regime is no longer in charge. But everybody's just a little bit afraid and cautiously optimistic. And if you could say something about your experience and your insights into what's happening in Syria, and what needs to really take place to see a positive future like what we have seen in South Africa. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying listening to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sana. Ambassador, your thoughts? It's a difficult thing to ask you because it's about a totally different country, but the transition from oppressive regime to an attempt to have democracy, liberation, etc. Your thoughts, please.
Oh, walaikum salam, Dr. Sana. We forget what South Africa was like just after President Mandela was released from prison. It was total and complete mayhem. That was one of the reasons why some of us didn't want to go back. We were scared because it was just so violent. there were massacres taking place. After President Mandela was released, there was massacres occurred. There was so much violence. Chris Hani was murdered, one of our leaders who, maybe one day we thought he would be one of the, become head of state one day. It was complete and utter chaos. It seemed at first as though law and order, was being lost. But somehow, because of the type of person that he was and the type of leadership he had around him, and the willingness of the Afrikaner people, to embrace reconciliation and forgiveness, it gradually became easier. For example, I was still in England when they decided that everybody should come forward and give up their military arms, unless you were a soldier or a police officer. Unless you were in the security forces, you were persuaded to come forward and hand in your arms. And, the amount of arms, there were just tons and tons and tons, tons of it. And I think even the society was shocked at the level of military hardware that was held by ordinary people. And, the former cadres who came in from exile, from the neighboring countries and from the rest of Africa. So I think, because we're now 30 years along the line, we forget what it was like right here in South Africa. And I think, so when I look at Syria and other places which are starting to try to formulate normalcy, I kind of have hope, because I look at our situation, and we were on the verge of a civil war in South Africa. And I think, especially after the murder of Chris Hani, South Africa was on the brink. And if South Africa had had a civil war, it would have been the mother of all civil wars, because every African nation had already stated that if there's a war in South Africa between the Black people and the apartheid regime, they were going to be on the side of the African National Congress. And we knew that the Europeans and the Americans would be on the side of our enemies. And reconciliation was the only path, and forgiveness, because the other path was going to be mayhem, and it would have taken maybe 30 to 50 years to reshape the country. Because if you look at Libya, it's completely undone. It's going to take decades to put it back together again. And I think that, when I look at Syria, I really am hopeful, and I hope that there will be leadership that will rise above, the small things and look at the bigger picture. And I think that a way has to be found to persuade the leadership to have broad shoulders and to look at the bigger picture and to embrace the kind of leadership that President Mandela advocated for. Because I think that is a path that people understand, and it is a path people can commit to, and it is a path that has shown results. We've got outcomes now that we can look at over the last 30 years and say, well, South Africa was a pit, it was a snake pit. And look what came out of it. So we can also use some of it, not all of it, because our histories, they're always a bit different. But I think the base, is the same. And there are things that need to be corrected. And I think that there are leaders that can be looked at on the continent, both in Asia and Africa, that can assist to help, Syria and Sudan, Libya, there's so many to reconstruct themselves, and I think we call it the reconstruction and development. And, it's something that we have to go through. I think Syria is going to have to go through it, and I think the leadership shouldn't be afraid of speaking to those who've been part of reformulating countries, like President Cyril Ramaphosa. He was very involved in reconstructing South Africa. He was part of crafting the constitution. But before that, he was in the negotiations with the Afrikaners, to try and put forward, and think of a different path. So I think that there are ways in which Syria could come out of where they are now and move forward. So I think, Dr. Sana, it's about the leadership embracing a different path and looking at examples that are there that can assist.
That's a brilliant advice and wisdom. Thank you very much. A little bit like the Arab Spring happened when the world itself is transforming and transmogrifying. We're seeing a similar situation with whether it's Sudan or Syria, Palestine. The world itself is not in a great place. So look to the traditional partners in the Western Hemisphere for guidance is proving perhaps not as fruitful. I'm being very diplomatic. And I think what you're saying is look to where there are countries like South Africa who have gone through and successfully undergone challenges. Nothing is perfect anywhere, but certainly that particular significant challenge that could have been so much worse for the entire universe was managed exceedingly well. Look to the examples that are not necessarily in the Western Hemisphere. That wisdom is very deep indeed, because we always, all of us, Africans, Asians, Latin America, always look to Europe and North America for guidance. And what you're saying is there's the rest of the world to learn from, and where there are actually best practices of managing exceedingly difficult transitions. Thank you for that wisdom. Just before considerate of your time, I would like to invite our colleagues here. I believe I asked Darcy if she would be willing to share something. And Alison, if you're willing as well, please do so. But let me give the floor first to Darcy.
So I'm so impressed and reassured with all of the content and the important concepts. But as a woman of a certain age, I had to laugh that both you, Madam Ambassador, and you, Dr. Sana, said I had to pinch myself. And because I have had that experience myself, and I can't help but wonder if it's a feminine perspective and an opportunity to acknowledge how unusual, how did we get here? How great that we are. And most of the work that I do with the Temple of Understanding is with our summer intern program. And I think maybe I'm going to start an I Pinched Myself series. But I think that the importance of faith, right? The formal, obviously, the tenets of our faith, but the informal influences, the daily ways that we integrate our faith and our sense of whichever faith. And I've learned that living around the world, as have most of you, in whatever environment, that it's the importance of faith as opposed to that faith, right, which is important. And so I want to carry some of this, both the political and as we work in the UN, which has its challenges. And I met a young Jesuit priest with our interns once, and the people were complaining about the UN and it's become too administrative and so on and so forth. And there was a young Jesuit priest at the back having his coffee, and he was listening to the interns, and he said, "You're right, there's no question, there needs to be a lot, but it is better than the other UN." And the kids' heads swiveled like, "What other UN?" He said, "Exactly. This is the one we have. The challenge now is what are we going to do with it? Streamline it, update it, improve it, whatever. And it's another way to get at what you have said, Madam Ambassador. And Dr. Sana, I love Syria. I spent some time there too. So all of these countries, and particularly I think our young women, I like to see them bring that informal and personal. The content is important. I'm not denigrating that. But I think that what we have to offer that's a slightly different perspective is that feminine, and I heard that in your stories and in your modesty, and I appreciate and I'm going to pull a couple of things from this as we start our summer intern program this June. So thank you to you both. Not a question really, but I was really glad to be included today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your words, and I think we need to try and influence our young women to be less rigid, especially those who are practicing the different faiths. They need to be more embracing and more relaxed in how they see others and how they look at their faith and the faith of other people. Not to denigrate other people, they need to be, be more respectful and more elastic, and it strengthens your faith as well if you are like that, So I think that's something that we do need to try and teach our young women.
Brilliant.
I'll be sure to include that with our interns this summer.
Thank you so much, Darcy. Allison, I'm not sure if you wanted to, you didn't answer me, so I'm not sure. I don't want to.
Oh, I am so excited, Madam Ambassador, to hear the interfaith perspective in particular. Since we are 65 years old, we've been doing interfaith for such a long time. But I'm also very encouraged about your whole journey as a woman. And we just finished the CSW, as you know, and the topic was basically violence against women. So I wanted to just ask you if you can look back to when Nelson Mandela came out of jail and when you started this new, wonderful approach to putting everything back together. What have you seen in terms of the role of women in South Africa over that period of time?
I think that the role of women has changed a lot in the society generally. They're very vocal. There's a lot of space for women within government. The presidents, all heads of state talk about women all the time. It's part of their conversation. We've also had a lot to do with gender-based violence. And I think probably Cyril Ramaphosa is the first head of state who actually called a conference of all women to discuss gender-based violence. And a lot of outcomes came out of that. I think it was held in 2018, 2019, but it was a really, really important. And I think how the conference started was suggested by the women in the African National Congress. They spoke to him and they said, President, we're tired of this violence against women. We need to do something about it that is more concrete. Yes, we have the laws and we have certain things, but we need to look at everything, the police, the laws, children, having secure spaces for children who are victims of violence. Their court hearings must be held differently, different things must be done. And I think out of that conference, a lot has taken place. And the private sector actually created a gender-based violence fund. It's a very important fund that we have, in the country, where business and government are, basically work together, work on this issue of gender-based violence. We have a minister for women, children, and people of disability. But that ministry is so important. It's actually in the presidency. It's a ministry in the presidency. And they do a lot of work around issues of women. around, also trying to encourage business to have more women on the boards. So now, if you're especially a state entity that has a board, you have to have women on the board. So that there has been a lot of change, but it's not enough. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress. And we are advocating for a women president. We've had enough. We had President Mandela, President Mbeki, President Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa, and we're saying, no, the next president must be a woman. We've had enough of you guys.
Wonderful.
Hopefully we'll be able to see you.
I hope so.
Excellency, we'll be able to see you in that role.
I'm too old.
Much of your experience, nonsense, given so much of your experience and the wisdom. And Excellency, we are deeply grateful to you. Yes, wait, we have one more question. Is that okay? I think you'll know the person asking it who actually managed to facilitate this particular exchange. Would you permit me to allow one more question, please, Your Excellency?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Dearest sister.
I know that one.
So I would like you to tell us a bit of the work of the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the work that your sister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, the minister, is undertaking as South Africa goes forward in this new era.
Well, thank you for that question. I'm really glad you asked about the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Well, she was appointed chair, as you know, in October. And the main task of the foundation is obviously, the memory, preserving the memory of President Nelson Mandela. So there's a memory museum within the foundation. And then the other task of the foundation is the Center for Dialogue, which was really President Mandela was very passionate about. He explained to one of the former CEOs he was telling me that he had a conversation once with President Mandela, who was asking about the progress of the Center for Dialogue. And he listened to them, and then he said, if you have two people discussing something like friends, that's a conversation. But if you have two people who fundamentally disagree and have to concede certain points and certain ways of doing things and reach an understanding arising from those disagreements, that's a dialogue. And that's what I'm interested in. And that is what the Center for Dialogue and Justice is all about. It's about arriving at just solutions where you're coming from very different paths and you reach a conclusion that is fair and just for both parties. So that's a large part of the work of the foundation. The foundation has also been involved in poverty alleviation and also in KwaZulu-Natal, after the very, very bad riots, they were involved in the, rebuilding of reconciliation between the warring parties in that conflagration. So there's a lot of work going on that, a lot of work the foundation does. The other part of the foundation is totally related to children, which was the mandate President Mandela gave to Mama Graça Machel. And the first mandate was to build a children's hospital. That has been met. That was the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital. That is up and running. And he insisted that would be built totally and completely on donations from the public, wherever they are in the world. And that has been done and has been realized. So I think, in a nutshell, that's some of the work that's been done by the foundation.
Thank you for taking that question, Your Excellency, and for answering it. We never said who your family was, so this question kind of brought up something else. But it is also an underlining of the remarkable heritage of the service that women leaders have provided and continue to provide in South Africa. I think you're absolutely right. If there is a context for women's leadership taking control of the country, there is so much in South Africa to offer, not only South Africa, but the entire world, quite frankly. We hope that the next Secretary General of the United Nations will be a woman too, who can bring in some of the wisdom and experience from around the world that has yet to be in that office, even though it is not a job anybody would want in their right mind. But it is an opportunity to bring to the space the wisdom of women's leadership, which will always, I think, be distinct. And you exemplify that so beautifully. We wish you good health. We wish you success. We wish you joy in all that you do. We hope to continue to hear from you about the remarkable work that you and this amazing legacy of a family and a nation that you represent continues to give us, the light that you continue to give us. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for being with us. And thank you to my colleagues who are here with us. I will conclude the recording now and thank everyone for participating and listening.